not only human genes, there are more virus-like fragments in our genome than there are human genes, and also there are way more bacterial cells than human cells in our bodies. And of course, most of these are good bacteria in that sense that we cooperate with them, and so there's a mutual relationship. But yeah, and that's, I think, one of the nice thing with this book. It starts very early with the evolution of humans, how the genomes are shaped, how human came about in the context with microbes. So of course there is a very intertwined history here between microbes, bacteria, viruses, and ourselves.
How much do we know about microbes in our own bodies?
Well, I mean, we can go back even further into history, and kind of humans have been around, I guess, Homo sapiens for 300,000 years maybe, and it was only towards the end of the 1600s that this Dutch, we'd call it a haberdasher, like a textile trader, began to grind to create lenses. And first of all, he was looking at his cloth that he was buying and selling with this kind of basic microscope. And then I guess he must have thought at some point, and his name's Anthony von Leeuwenhoek, at some point he thought, I'm going to start looking at the natural world. And he got his little proto-microscopes and looked at everything from pond water to the plaque in our teeth, even at his own semen. And he found that, everything was teeming with this microscopic life, these things that no one had ever seen before. And yeah, I like to think, and I write in the book, it's probably the closest that any humans ever got to, kind of tumbling down a rabbit hole and finding themselves in a world of fantastical creatures. And you can see he wrote letters to the Royal Society in London, and you can still read them, and it just shows how amazed and how kind of enraptured he was with these discoveries. But it still took another couple of hundred years to work out what these things actually did. He called them animalcules, and it wasn't until the end of the 19th century that people made the connection that some of these microbes might be causing infectious diseases. Before that, it was thought that it might be kind of black magic or angry gods or inauspicious constellations of the stars or nasty smells that caused infectious diseases. And people like Pasteur, Robert Koch in Germany, they began to connect the dots and realize that bacteria were causing some of these devastating infectious diseases. But even now, we're still learning about what they do, and as Dag said, that they don't just harm us, they don't just make us sick. Bacteria and viruses play all sorts of vital roles in the planet, in our bodies, and I'm sure people know about the digestive system and the impact that the microbiome has on the digestive system. But we're also learning that bacteria in our stomachs can impact our moods. I remember one of the kind of starting points for this book was when I read a paper, I think in Nature, by some Dutch scientists who were curious about what the bacteria in our stomachs actually are. Right? We know we have kind of 40 trillion bacteria in our stomachs. This is slightly more than the number of human cells, as Dag said. It weighs maybe a kilo, but they wanted to find out what the bacteria actually do. So they basically took the feces, the poo, from 2,000 people, and they sequenced the DNA of the bacteria. And what they found was that about 90% of this bacteria was capable of producing neurotransmitters, so chemical messengers like dopamine, serotonin, that are capable of influencing human moods. And what's really astonishing is that this doesn't happen in the wild with bacteria. They've evolved, as Dag said, over millions of years into these symbiotic relationships with us to give us a reward when we feed them with something that they want. But I was curious if bacteria can have such an impact on the way that we think as individuals and our moods, then what impact might they have on kind of history, society, economics, on kind of aggregations of bodies and minds?
Yeah. Didn't we talk about that, Dag? If bacteria is just a part of life and nature, or is it actually controlling life,
Yeah, I mean, it opens up a completely new perspective. It's like many types of parasites that are known to manipulate their host to do the most stupid thing from the host perspective, but which is very smart from the parasite perspective, because it helps the parasite to be transmitted to other organisms. And of course, in the case of bacteria, if they would like sugar, they can stimulate our desire for sugar. In Norway, we have this story about Carus and Bactus, right? That asks for more sugar and bread, loaf med syrup.
Yes.
And they are obeyed to some extent. But in reality, it might work a bit the same way, that this desire for certain food stuff, and especially sugars, likely might be at least provided by or motivated by bacteria.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say that we are the slaves of bacteria, but certainly they can manipulate our moods and desires to a, I would say, almost alarming degree.
Yeah, because Richard Dawkins proposed that the gene was our ego was supposed to like form its do the formation of itself, and it was an ego creature inside of us. But bacteria can be the same thing as well.
Yeah, it's. I mean, his idea was that, as he phrased it, that we were the surviving robots of the genomes. They created any kind of organism, of course, as a optimum surviving robots to transmit the DNA to new generations. And some argue that the humans are, to a large extent, shaped around our internal microbiota in the gut. So, which probably is a bit of an exaggeration, but it's as I said, it opened up completely new perspectives.
Yeah, but I think one of the nice things about a lot of the more recent research on the microbiome and on the impact of bacteria and viruses on humans and other things is that it kind of, in a way, it lets us see nature in a very different way to Dawkins and this kind of Darwinist or neo-Darwinist focus on kind of selfishness in society that seemed to be kind of, at least in the UK, in tune with kind of the ideology of Thatcher and seeing nature as kind of red in tooth and claw. And actually, there's a lot of research that shows that there's these very close symbiotic relationships between humans and bacteria that benefit both. And just to pick up on something else that Dag said that I just find fascinating is this idea of viral DNA in the human genome, and the fact that humans or our distant ancestors have acquired from retrovirus infections kind of genes that have allowed us to do things that we think of as being really kind of really important to ourselves as humans. So one example is the placenta and the ability to give birth to live young, and apparently it was something of a mystery for a long time. The kind of how the placenta was able to kind of connect to the female womb, and why it didn't get kind of detected as some kind of foreign object, because it's genetically distinct, and why it wasn't destroyed by the immune system. And when scientists looked at the genes that coded for the surface that connected the placenta to the mother, they found that the surface was coded for by genes that had been inherited from a virus infection that occurred, I think, 180 million years ago. And the mechanism by which this surface joins the female is very similar to the way in which viruses join onto human cells without being detected and kind of infect these cells. So, I mean, obviously it's an oversimplification, but it's bizarre to think that if it wasn't for this viral infection that happened tens of millions of years ago, that maybe we'd all be kind of hatching out of eggs still. Really, really weird stuff. And the other one that struck me with retroviruses was the way in which information passes between neurons. And again, a viral infection that happened tens of millions of years ago seems to have had a really big impact on our ability to transfer information between brain cells. And the way information moves between brain cells is very similar to the way that viruses infect, go from one cell to another, and the genes have been inherited. The genes that code for these little protein bubbles have been inherited from retrovirus infections that happened tens of millions of years ago. And scientists have actually kind of created mice artificially in laboratories without this gene, and they aren't able to learn things. They aren't able to remember. It's really, again, something as kind of important to our idea of ourselves as thinking and forming memories and learning. It's not a human thing. It's something that, at least in part, we've inherited from retroviruses. It's pretty mad.
Is that one of the missing links, that transformation you talked about now? Is that we just say something happened like 10 million years ago and then this happened? Is that just a theory, or?
I mean, it's Dag can correct me if I'm wrong, but these are studies that are published in kind of Science and Nature that are well-established scientific facts. At least I take them as such.
Absolutely, it's very plausible hypothesis, still hypothesis, but it shows that this not only is possible but also even likely, and it also shows nicely that there are more cooperation and competition actually in nature, and we are all a kind of walking colony, both in as humans, and both in terms of our genes, and also of course the microbiota, and that most of this microbiota is symbiotic to us. We couldn't have existed without all these bacteria.
And of course we evolved from bacteria like beings, right?
The very first starting point and that is something we discussed when we talked about how life came about, that this archaea, which is kind of bacteria, but not the same as bacteria. Actually, they're quite distant from bacteria. But that's probably the starting point for multicellular life. So we owe bacteria quite a bit, but in this context, it's also interesting to see how they have shaped not only our evolutionary history, but also the history per se, more modern history.
And what do we know about the relationship between microbes, bacteria, and the DNA and the genes? How does this go into each other, sort of?
Well, it's worked mostly via the immune system, and of course much of this is a kind of, as I said, arms race that bacteria, especially those that harms us, and also viruses, continuously try to escape our immune protection, and the immune system tried to keep pace on that by continuously modulating itself, also to some extent with aid of these non-coding transposons. In that sense, it's a very close link with the way our genes work and the immune system and the microbes.
Yeah, and I think again, it was fascinating for me coming as a layperson to this, and when I was at high school, you learn this kind of Darwinist interpretation of evolution that we evolved because of competition between